On the outskirts of a small farming town, where dreams wither like unpicked crops, a simple act of kindness was about to change 2 lives forever. James Cooper was just another struggling farmer, barely keeping his family's legacy alive, when a rain-soaked stranger appeared at his door. What started as offering shelter from a storm would become something neither of them expected. But this stranded traveler harbored a secret that could shake their growing connection to its core. She was Elizabeth Chen, the hidden heir to one of the largest fortunes in the country, running from a life of privilege and expectations. In the days that would follow, they would discover that sometimes the greatest wealth isn't measured in dollars, and that true riches can grow in the most unexpected places. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun hadn't yet touched the horizon when James Cooper's boots hit the weathered wooden floor of his farmhouse. Every board creaked with familiarity, each sound a reminder of the generations that had walked these same planks before him. At 32, he carried the weight of his family's legacy in the calluses of his hands and the perpetual furrow in his brow. Dawn painted the sky in shades of amber as he made his way to the barn, his breath visible in the crisp morning air. The bank statements on his kitchen table told one story: 3 months behind on the mortgage, equipment payments overdue, and a dwindling savings account that wouldn't survive another failed harvest. But the land told another, of perseverance, of hope buried deep in soil that had sustained his family for 4 generations. Inside the barn, the familiar scent of hay and leather greeted him as he began his morning routine. Old Buck, his father's favorite horse, nickered softly from his stall. James paused to run a hand along the horse's greying muzzle, remembering how his father used to say that a farmer's worth wasn't measured by the size of his bank account, but by how well he cared for his animals and his land. "What would you do, Dad?" he whispered to the empty barn, his words lost among the rafters. 2 years had passed since cancer took both his parents within months of each other, leaving him alone with a struggling farm and a mountain of medical bills. His mother's garden, once vibrant with vegetables and flowers, now lay fallow. Another casualty of time and circumstance. The local farming community watched him with a mixture of sympathy and resignation. Young farmers were a dying breed, pushed out by corporate agriculture and rising costs. Just last month, the Hendersons sold their property to a development company after 50 years of working the land. The thought of the same fate befalling his family's farm kept James awake most nights. In town, well-meaning neighbors like Sarah from the diner often tried to set him up with their daughters or nieces. "A man shouldn't be alone out there," they'd say, not understanding that loneliness wasn't his burden, failure was. Each declined invitation and gentle rejection added to his reputation as the reclusive Cooper boy, too proud or too stubborn to accept help or change. The morning wore on as James tended to his reduced herd of cattle. He'd sold half of them last spring to keep the farm afloat, a decision that still tasted bitter in his mouth. The remaining animals gathered at the fence as he approached with feed, their trust in him unwavering despite his private doubts about their future. By midday, the sun beat down mercilessly as he worked on the irrigation system. The ancient pipes groaned and leaked, another repair he couldn't properly afford. His neighbor, Bill Matthews, had offered to help him modernize the system months ago, but James had declined. Cooper men had always solved their own problems. The small farmhouse kitchen welcomed him at lunchtime with echoes of better days. His mother's recipes still hung on the refrigerator, their corners yellowed and curling. He made himself a simple sandwich, eating while standing at the counter and studying the weather radar on his phone. The forecast showed storms approaching, bad ones. He'd need to secure the equipment and check the barn roof that had been threatening to leak. As afternoon faded into evening, dark clouds gathered on the horizon, matching his mood. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain and the promise of change. James thought about the crops that desperately needed the moisture. trying to calculate if his careful planning would be enough to turn things around this season. In the growing darkness, he could almost hear his father's voice carried on the wind. "The land provides, son. You just have to know how to listen." But lately all James could hear was the ticking clock of debt and the whispers of failure. He was the last Cooper farmer, and he was watching his heritage slip through his fingers like the dry soil that no longer held life as it once had. Thunder rolled in the distance as he headed back to the house, unaware that the approaching storm would bring more than just rain to his door. It would bring a chance to save not just his farm, but himself, though not in any way he could have imagined. 3 days before she appeared on James Cooper's farm, Elizabeth Chen sat in her father's steel and glass office on the 48th floor of Chen Technologies headquarters, her perfectly manicured nails digging into her palms. The Manhattan skyline stretched endlessly behind her father's imposing desk, a constant reminder of the empire she was meant to inherit. "The merger with Maxwell Industries is essential for our expansion into sustainable technology," her father declared, his voice carrying the weight of decades of business success. "And Richard Maxwell's son is a suitable match. The wedding will strengthen both families' positions." He spoke of her future marriage as if discussing a quarterly earnings report. Elizabeth stared at the corporate portfolios spread across the desk, each page outlining her predetermined future. At 28, she had earned her MBA from Harvard, led successful project teams, and proven her business acumen time and again. Yet here she sat, reduced to a bargaining chip in her father's corporate chess game. Her mother's absence hung heavy in the room, as it had for the past decade. Sarah Chen had been the warmth in their household, the one who encouraged Elizabeth's secret passion for environmental science and sustainable agriculture. "Follow your heart," she'd said before cancer claimed her, "but be brave enough to fight for what you believe in." The irony wasn't lost on Elizabeth that Chen Technologies was now pursuing sustainable technology, not from any environmental conviction, but because market trends demanded it. Her own carefully researched proposals for agricultural innovation had been dismissed as hobby projects by the board of directors, despite their potential for both profit and global impact. In her private apartment that evening, Elizabeth scrolled through her research files, studies on regenerative farming, sustainable agriculture projects, and small-scale farming innovations. Her legitimate business trips to agricultural conferences had been her only taste of the life she dreamed of, away from board meetings and shareholder expectations. The final straw came during the Maxwell family dinner. Richard Maxwell Jr., her intended fiancé, spent the entire evening talking about golf scores and vacation homes, while dismissing her attempts to discuss agricultural sustainability as quaint. Under the crystal chandeliers of the Maxwell estate, Elizabeth felt the walls of her gilded cage closing in. That night, she made her decision. Her mother's inheritance, kept separate from the Chen fortune, provided enough resources to disappear. Years of dealing with corporate security had taught her how to evade surveillance. Within hours, she had a new identity prepared, a burner phone, and a small bag packed with practical clothing she'd secretly accumulated. Elizabeth's childhood. Nanny, the only person who truly knew her heart, helped her slip away in the pre-dawn hours. "Your mother would be proud," the elderly woman whispered, pressing a farewell kiss to her cheek. "She never wanted this life for you either." As her car headed west on I-80, Elizabeth felt an unfamiliar sensation. Freedom she had left behind. The designer clothes, the society galas, and the suffocating expectations. Her only regret was knowing the scandal would hurt her father, but she couldn't sacrifice her life to be the daughter he wanted instead of the woman she needed to become. She spent weeks moving from small town to small town, learning to blend in, working odd jobs to maintain her cover. Her business education proved surprisingly useful in helping small local shops with their books or marketing, but she never stayed long enough to form connections. Aware that her father's private investigators would be searching, The storm that would lead her to James Cooper's farm caught her off guard. She had been driving back roads, avoiding major highways when the weather turned violent. As rain lashed her windshield and thunder cracked overhead, Elizabeth realized she was truly on her own for the first time in her life. Yet somehow, despite the danger and uncertainty, she felt more alive than she had in years. What she couldn't know, as she pulled onto the muddy road leading to the Cooper farm, was that she was about to find everything she'd been searching for: purpose, authenticity, and a chance to make a real difference. Sometimes, she would later reflect, you have to lose your way to find your true path. Elizabeth woke to unfamiliar sounds: a rooster's crow, the distant lowing of cattle, and the creak of old wooden boards. Sunlight filtered through faded curtains in the small guest room where James Cooper had let her stay the night before. Her designer watch, carefully hidden under her sleeve, showed 5:30 a.m. Back in Manhattan, she'd still be in deep sleep, her premium blackout curtains keeping the world at bay. The events of the previous night felt almost dreamlike. Her car stuck in the mud, the rain pelting down, and the tall, quiet farmer who'd offered her shelter without hesitation. He'd asked few questions, showing her to a spare room with a simple "get some rest. Morning comes early here." Now, the smell of coffee drew her from the bedroom. She'd changed into the spare clothes from her emergency bag, simple jeans and a flannel shirt that would have horrified her father's image consultants. In the kitchen, she found James already dressed for work, his expression guarded as he poured 2 cups of coffee. "I'm sorry about your car," he said, sliding 1 cup across the worn kitchen table. "Road's still too muddy to get a tow truck out here. Probably won't dry out until afternoon." He studied her over his coffee cup, clearly trying to reconcile her presence in his ordered world. "I appreciate your hospitality," Elizabeth replied, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. "I know it's not common to take in strangers these days." The coffee was strong and black, nothing like her usual artisanal lattes, but somehow perfect for the moment. Wouldn't be right to leave anyone out in weather like that. He glanced at the window, where morning sun now streamed through storm-cleaned glass. "You've got work to do, but you're welcome to wait here until the road clears." Elizabeth watched him gather his tools, noting the careful way he handled each item, the deliberate economy of his movements. Everything about him spoke of responsibility and purpose. "Could I—" She hesitated, then pressed on. "Could I help? With the farm work, I mean. It seems only fair since you've helped me." James paused, surprise flickering across his features. "Farm work isn't like gardening in the city," he said, not unkindly. "It's hard labor." "I'm stronger than I look," Elizabeth replied, a hint of steel entering her voice. "And I'm a quick learner." She needed to keep busy, to avoid thinking about the life she'd left behind and the decisions still ahead. Something in her tone must have convinced him. "Your choice," he said finally. "But don't say I didn't warn you." The morning that followed was a revelation. James showed her how to feed the animals, explaining each step with patient precision. Elizabeth threw herself into every task, determined to prove her worth. She stumbled occasionally, earned a few blisters, but never complained. By mid-morning, word had spread through the small farming community about James Cooper's mysterious guest. Pickup trucks drove by slowly, their occupants trying to catch a glimpse of the stranger. The local diner's gossip mill was already churning with speculation. "Don't mind them," James said as another truck rolled past. "Small town, not much happens here worth talking about." He demonstrated how to check the irrigation lines, his hands sure and capable on the equipment. Elizabeth found herself studying him when he wasn't looking, the way the sun had weathered his face, the quiet confidence in his movements, the gentle way he handled even the most mundane tasks. He was everything the corporate world wasn't: genuine, unaffected, connected to something real. As they worked, she asked questions about the farm, its history, the challenges of modern agriculture. Her business mind couldn't help but notice the opportunities for improvement, the potential for innovation. But she kept these thoughts to herself. Instead, she focused on learning, on understanding this world so different from her own. James, in turn, found himself impressed by her willingness to work and her intelligent questions. She wasn't what he'd expected from her initially polished appearance. There was something almost desperate in her desire to be useful, to understand the farm's workings. By lunchtime, they'd fallen into an unexpected rhythm. Elizabeth helped prepare a simple meal, and they ate on the porch, watching clouds build again in the distance. The silence between them was comfortable now, filled with the sounds of the farm and the whisper of wind through the corn. The road should be dry enough soon, James said finally, though there was a note of reluctance in his voice. Something about her presence had shifted the weight of his solitude, made the day feel less heavy. Elizabeth stared at the horizon, her heart torn. The practical choice would be to leave, to continue running, to protect herself and James from the complications her presence would surely bring. But for the first time since fleeing Manhattan, she felt grounded, purposeful. "What if," she began, then paused, weighing her words carefully. "What if I stayed a few days, helped out around the farm? I know you said you work alone, but an extra pair of hands couldn't hurt." James should have said no. His life was complicated, enough without adding a mysterious woman with secrets in her eyes. But watching her hold his mother's old coffee cup, sitting in his father's favorite porch chair as if she belonged there, he found himself nodding. "Few days," he agreed, not knowing. He was setting in motion events that would change both their lives forever. "We'll see how it goes." As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the fields, neither of them could have guessed that this simple decision would lead to a journey of discovery, redemption, and unexpected love. The truth of Elizabeth's identity lurked like storm clouds on the horizon. But for now, they were just two people finding something they didn't know they needed in the most unexpected place. Over the next few days, Elizabeth discovered muscles she never knew existed. Each morning brought new aches, but also new lessons. James proved to be a patient teacher, his quiet instruction filled with generations of farming wisdom. She found herself looking forward to their dawn meetings in the kitchen, where coffee and comfortable silence preceded each day's work. "The trick is to listen to the land," James explained one morning as they walked the eastern field. "Every crack in the soil, every withered leaf tells you something." He knelt, scooping up a handful of earth. Elizabeth joined him, mimicking his gesture, trying to see what he saw in the dark granules slipping through their fingers. Her corporate training had taught her to analyze spreadsheets and market trends, but here she was, learning a different kind of literacy. The way the wind changed before rain, how the cattle's behavior predicted storms, the subtle differences in crop coloration that signaled nutrient deficiencies. These were textbooks that couldn't be studied in Harvard's halls. "You're not what I expected," James admitted one afternoon as they repaired fencing. The sun had bronzed her formerly pale skin, and her hands were developing calluses to match his own. "Most people who stop here can't wait to leave." Elizabeth paused, wire cutters poised mid-snip. "Maybe I'm tired of being what people expect," she replied, the truth of it surprising her. Here, stripped of designer clothes and corporate titles, she felt more herself than ever before. The farm's financial struggles became increasingly apparent to her trained eye. She noticed James's careful rationing of resources, the way he repaired, rather than replaced, the strategic decisions about which parts of the farm to prioritize. Her business mind itched to help, to implement the sustainable farming practices she'd researched, but she held back, knowing any suggestions would raise questions about her background. Their days fell into a rhythm. Mornings in the fields, afternoons, tending to equipment and animals, evenings spent on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors no Manhattan artist could capture. James found himself talking more, sharing stories of his parents, his hopes for the farm, his fears about its future. Dad always said farming's not just about growing crops, he told her one evening. It's about growing hope. Every seed you plant is a bet on tomorrow. The words carried the weight of recent loss, and Elizabeth found herself reaching for his hand before she could think better of it. To her surprise, he didn't pull away. They sat in companionable silence, their linked hands a bridge between their worlds. The moment stretched, filled with unspoken possibilities and dangerous hope. The local community watched with growing interest. Sarah, from the diner, started adding extra pie to James's usual lunch order. For your friend. Bill Matthews, passing by on his tractor, called out offers to help with repairs he'd previously been refused. The weekly farmers' market buzzed with speculation about the mysterious woman at Cooper Farm. Elizabeth felt the attention, but found she didn't mind it the way she had in Manhattan. Here, curiosity came with casseroles and genuine concern, not paparazzi and ulterior motives. Still, each friendly inquiry about her past felt like a small betrayal, forcing her to craft careful half-truths. James noticed her discomfort with personal questions, but didn't pry. He had his own experience with unwanted attention after his parents' deaths. Instead, he focused on teaching her more about the farm, finding unexpected pleasure in sharing his knowledge. "You've got good instincts," he commented, after she correctly identified a developing problem in the irrigation system. "Not everyone can read the signs like that." Elizabeth beamed at the praise, even as guilt gnawed at her. Her instincts came from hours of research into agricultural systems, preparation for projects her father had dismissed. But the practical application of that knowledge, the physical work of implementing solutions, was teaching her more than any research paper could. As the days passed, something shifted between them. It wasn't just attraction, though, that simmered beneath their every interaction. It was recognition. Two souls who had carried their burdens alone for too long, finding unexpected understanding in each other's company. One morning, watching him outline his plans for crop rotation, Elizabeth realized she was no longer just playing at being a farmer's helper. She cared about this land, about its survival, about the quiet man who poured his heart into every acre. The realization terrified her. She was still Elizabeth Chen, heir to Chen Technologies. This interlude, no matter how precious, had an expiration date. But watching James demonstrate the proper way to check soil pH levels, his hands sure and gentle in the earth, she allowed herself to imagine a different future. One where boardrooms were replaced by barn doors, where success was measured in healthy crops and honest work, where love grew as naturally as the corn reaching for the sun. It was a dangerous dream, but in that moment, with soil under her nails and the warm sun on her back, Elizabeth let herself believe in it. Just a little, just for now. The opportunity came during a particularly frustrating morning when James was struggling with the farm's outdated accounting system. A collection of receipts, handwritten ledgers, and scattered Excel files that would have made any financial advisor cringe. Elizabeth watched him run his hands through his hair for the 10th time, her fingers itching to help. "Maybe I could take a look," she offered carefully. "I used to help with bookkeeping at my last job." The partial truth felt bitter in her mouth, but she couldn't stand seeing him struggle with something she could easily fix. James hesitated, pride warring with practicality. Finally, he pushed the laptop toward her. "Be my guest. Can't make it any worse." Elizabeth's fingers flew across the keyboard, years of business training taking over. She created a streamlined system, organizing expenses, tracking income, and projecting cash flow. She kept her modifications simple enough to appear self-taught rather than MBA-driven, but effective enough to make a difference. "How did you—" James stared at the clear, organized spreadsheets she'd created. I can actually understand what's happening with the money now." "Sometimes a fresh perspective helps," she said, fighting to keep her voice casual. "And while I was looking at the numbers, I noticed something. Your irrigation system is costing more in repairs than a new one would in monthly payments." James's expression clouded. Can't afford new equipment right now. What if you could? Elizabeth pulled up the grant applications she'd found during her research. There are government programs for sustainable farming upgrades. The paperwork's a bit complicated, but I could help. She watched the internal struggle play across his face. Cooper pride versus practical necessity. Finally, he nodded. Show me what you found. Over the next few days, they worked together on the application. Elizabeth carefully dumbed down her expertise, presenting each suggestion as something she'd read about or heard of, rather than the product of years of research and business planning. The local farming community noticed the changes. Bill Matthews stopped by one afternoon, eyeing the newly organized equipment shed and updated record-keeping system. Place is looking different, James. Getting all modern on us? Elizabeth's been helping with some improvements, James replied, a note of pride in his voice that made her heart flutter. Word spread through the community. Some, like Bill, were cautiously approving. Others muttered about city folk, trying to change traditional ways. Elizabeth felt the weight of their scrutiny, even as she continued implementing subtle improvements. She introduced James to online farmers' markets, showing him how to get better prices for his produce. She helped him set up a simple website, carefully designed to look amateur enough to not raise suspicions about her skills. Each small success made it harder to maintain her cover, but also harder to contemplate leaving. Their evenings took on a new pattern. After dinner, they would sit at the kitchen table, heads bent together over laptop or paperwork, planning and discussing ideas. Elizabeth found herself having to bite back sophisticated business terms, translating her knowledge into simpler language. "You're full of surprises," James said one night, looking at her with a warmth that made her pulse quicken. "Never met anyone who understands both spreadsheets and soil the way you do." The guilt was constant now, a shadow over every interaction. Each time she helped him, each improvement she suggested felt both right and wrong. Right because the farm was genuinely benefiting. Wrong because it was all built on lies. The breaking point nearly came when she spotted a news alert on her burner phone. Heir still missing. The article mentioned private investigators searching the Midwest. Her father's stern face stared out from the screen. His public plea for her return, a masterpiece of corporate PR. James found her sitting on the porch steps that evening, her phone quickly hidden away. "Everything okay?" he asked, settling beside her. "Just thinking about choices," she said softly. "How one decision can change everything." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Like staying to help a struggling farm instead of moving on. Like that," she agreed, her throat tight. "James, there's something I should tell you." But before she could continue, his hand found hers in the gathering darkness. "Whatever it is, does it change who you've been these past weeks? The way you care about the farm, the work you've done?" Elizabeth thought about the woman she'd become here, someone who worked hard, who solved problems, who cared deeply about more than profit margins. "No," she whispered, "that's all real. Then maybe that's all that matters right now." They sat in silence, watching the stars emerge. Elizabeth knew she was falling in love, not just with James, but with this life, its rhythms, its challenges, its simple truths. She also knew that sooner or later her past would catch up with them. But for now she held tight to his hand and prayed that when the truth came out, he would remember this moment. Sarah's diner had been the heart of local gossip for 3 generations, and the mysterious woman at Cooper Farm was the juiciest topic they'd had since the Methodist minister ran off with the choir director. The breakfast crowd huddled over their coffee cups, speculating in hushed tones that weren't quite hushed enough. "She's got educated hands," Mrs. Peterson declared, gesturing with her fork. "Did you see how she redid James's filing system at the farmer's market? My Henry says the boy's actually turning a profit now. Too educated, if you ask me," Tom Wilson grumbled. "Since when does a drifter know about government grants and internet marketing? Something ain't right about her." Elizabeth heard the whispers as she picked up their weekly supply of pie. She'd learned to smile through the scrutiny, to deflect questions with vague answers about trying something new and needing a change. But each curious glance felt like a spotlight, each friendly inquiry a potential trap. James noticed her tension as they drove back to the farm. "Small towns have long memories and longer tongues," he said apologetically. "They'll find something else to talk about eventually." But Elizabeth knew better. She'd seen the news reports increasing, the search for the Chen heiress spreading across the Midwest. It was only a matter of time before someone made the connection. Their relationship had grown into something precious and fragile. James no longer bothered with pretenses about her temporary stay. Her clothes hung in the spare room closet. Her boots had their own spot by the door, and they moved around each other in the kitchen with the easy familiarity of people who'd known each other for years rather than weeks. The farm was transforming too. The grant money had come through, thanks to Elizabeth's carefully disguised expertise. New irrigation systems were being installed, and the first phase of their sustainable farming initiative was showing promising results. "We could expand the organic section next season," James said one evening as they reviewed the farm's improved finances. "Maybe try those heritage vegetables you mentioned." The way he said "we" made her heart ache with equal parts joy and fear. Elizabeth threw herself into farm work with renewed intensity, as if physical labor could outrun her guilt. She learned to drive the tractor, helped with equipment repairs, and spent hours researching innovative farming techniques that might help the Cooper farm thrive. But her past was catching up. One morning, a sleek black car drove slowly past the farm. Elizabeth recognized the style, her father's private investigators. She ducked behind the barn, heart pounding, until it passed. That evening, during their usual dinner on the porch, James seemed thoughtful. "Had an interesting visitor today," he said carefully. "Man in an expensive suit, asking questions about you." Elizabeth's fork clattered against her plate. "What? What did you tell him?" "Told him I don't discuss my private life with strangers." James's eyes met hers. "But Elizabeth, if you're in some kind of trouble..." "It's not what you think," she said quickly. I haven't done anything wrong. I just needed to get away from something." He was quiet for a long moment. "Away from what?" Before she could answer, headlights swept across the farmhouse. Bill Matthews' truck pulled up, unusual for this time of evening. His face was grave as he approached the porch. "James, Elizabeth might want to see this." He held out his tablet, open to a news site. Elizabeth's heart stopped. There on the screen was her corporate headshot, side by side with a grainy security camera image of her leaving a gas station 2 towns over. The headline read, "Missing Heiress Elizabeth Chen, Spotted in Midwest. $100,000 reward for information." The silence that followed was deafening. Elizabeth couldn't bear to look at James, couldn't face the betrayal she knew she'd see in his eyes. Bill shifted uncomfortably. "Thought you should know," he said quietly. "Town's already buzzing about it. Tom Wilson's wife recognized her from one of them society magazines." Elizabeth stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the porch boards. "I should go. I'll pack my things." "Elizabeth, wait." James's voice stopped her. He turned to Bill. "Thanks for letting us know. We'll handle it from here." After Bill left, the silence returned, heavy with unspoken words. Finally, James spoke. "Were you ever going to tell me?" "Yes, no, I don't know." Elizabeth wrapped her arms around herself. "Everything here became so real, so important. I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" "Afraid you'd look at me differently. Afraid you'd think it was all some rich girl's game. Afraid you'd stop seeing me and only see the money." The words tumbled out, weeks of pent-up fears and feelings. "Because this, all of this, the farm, the work, us, it's the most real thing I've ever had." James stood, his expression unreadable in the gathering dusk. "Why did you really come here, Elizabeth?" "I ran away from an arranged marriage and a life I never chose," she said softly. "But I stayed because of you, because for the first time in my life, I found somewhere I actually belong." The porch creaked as James stepped closer, and all the help with the farm, the improvements, the grants. That was all real. I've studied sustainable agriculture for years, but my father never took it seriously. Here, I could finally put that knowledge to use, make a real difference. A real difference, he repeated, like falling for a struggling farmer. Elizabeth's heart clenched. That wasn't planned, that just happened, and it's the most honest thing in my life. The distant sound of more cars approaching broke the moment. Elizabeth recognized the sound of news vans on the gravel road. Her time was up. The news vans never made it to the farm that night. James had called Bill, who rallied a few other farmers to park their tractors strategically along the narrow access road, claiming a late-night equipment move. It bought them time. But Elizabeth knew it was only temporary. They stayed up until dawn, sitting at the kitchen table where they'd shared so many meals and dreams. Elizabeth told him everything, about her father's empire, her mother's death, the arranged marriage, and her secret passion for sustainable agriculture. "All those improvements you suggested," James said, running a finger along the rim of his coffee cup. "They weren't just random ideas, were they?" Elizabeth shook her head. "I've spent years studying agricultural innovation, had a whole portfolio of sustainable farming projects ready to present to my father's board. They dismissed them as hobby projects." She laughed softly. "Ironic that I had to run away from billions of dollars to finally put them into practice." Outside, the first hints of sunrise painted the sky. They'd watched this sunrise together many times over the past weeks, always heading out to work afterward. Today, everything was different. "The grant money," James said suddenly. "Was that real? Completely legitimate?" Elizabeth assured him. "Every improvement, every suggestion, it was all above board. I just used my knowledge without explaining where it came from." James was quiet for a long moment. "Show me," he finally said. "Show you what?" "Show me everything you wanted to do with the farm, all your plans, no more hiding your expertise." Elizabeth stared at him, then pulled out her laptop. Not the simple one she used for farm work, but her personal one with all her research. For the next few hours, she walked him through detailed plans for sustainable crop rotation, water conservation systems, and organic farming techniques that could transform Cooper Farm into a model of modern agricultural innovation. "This," James said, pointing to a section about heritage seed programs, "this is why you got so excited about that seed catalog last week." Elizabeth smiled. "I've been studying heritage crop yields for years. The market potential," she caught herself. "Sorry, sometimes I slip into business mode." "Don't apologize." James reached across the table, taking her hand. "You've been holding back all this time, haven't you? Trying to seem less knowledgeable than you are. I didn't want to raise suspicions or make you feel—" She trailed off. "Feel what? Inferior?" His thumb traced patterns on her palm. "Elizabeth, watching you throw yourself into farm work, seeing how much you care about this land. That means more than any degree or bank account." The morning light strengthened, reminding them that reality couldn't be held at bay forever. Elizabeth's phone buzzed with news alerts about her disappearance. The reward for information had doubled. "I should leave," she said, though the words felt like glass in her throat. "The media will find me eventually. I don't want to drag you into this circus." "Pretty sure I'm already in the circus," James replied. His eyes held hers. "The question is, do you want to run again, or do you want to stay and fight?" "Fight how? My father's lawyers. Can't force you to marry someone. Can't make you be something you're not." James stood, pacing the kitchen. "You've proven that sustainable agriculture can work. The farm's numbers show it. What if—" "What? If what? What if we got ahead of the story, showed that you're not just some rebellious heiress playing farmer, but someone with real vision and expertise?" Elizabeth's pulse quickened. "You'd do that? Stand with me?" James stepped closer, cupping her face in his calloused hands. "I'm pretty sure I'd do anything for you." Then he kissed her, and for a moment all the complications fell away. When they parted, Elizabeth rested her forehead against his. The publicity will be intense. Everyone will have an opinion about us. The poor farmer and the rich heiress will be a headline. Let them talk, James said. We know what's real. They spent the morning planning. Elizabeth made calls to her few trusted allies, her old nanny, a sympathetic board member, her mother's lawyer. James contacted Bill and other local farmers who'd benefited from their innovations. By afternoon, dark clouds were gathering again, much like the night Elizabeth had first arrived. But this time, when lightning split the sky, they stood together, on the porch, watching the storm approach. Last time there was a storm like this, you were running away, James said, his arm around her waist. Elizabeth leaned into him. Now I'm running towards something. Thunder rolled across the fields as rain began to fall. Tomorrow would bring reporters, lawyers, and the full weight of Elizabeth's old life crashing into her new one. But tonight, they had the storm, the farm, and the truth of what they'd grown together. In the distance, headlights appeared, more news vans probably, or perhaps her father's investigators. Elizabeth straightened her shoulders. This time she wouldn't hide. She had real work to do, a man she loved beside her, and a future worth fighting for. The rain fell harder, but neither of them moved inside. They'd grown something precious here among the cornfields and cattle pastures, something that had nothing to do with money or status. Tomorrow, they would show the world that love, like the best crops, can grow in the most unexpected places if you just have the courage to plant the seeds. By sunrise, the gravel road leading to Cooper Farm had transformed into a media circus. News vans jostled for position, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky like mechanical sunflowers. Reporters clutched coffee cups and microphones. Their eager faces turned toward the farmhouse where the biggest story of the year was about to break. Inside, Elizabeth stood before the mirror in her simple room, straightening her collar. She'd chosen her outfit carefully, work jeans, boots, and a clean flannel shirt. Not the power suits of her past or the designer dresses her father preferred, but the clothes that represented who she'd become. You ready for this? James appeared in the doorway, looking uncomfortable in his newest pair of jeans and a pressed shirt. No, she admitted, but it's time. She touched the small stack of folders on her desk, documentation of their sustainable farming initiatives, proof that her time here had been more than just hiding. The sound of car doors slamming drew their attention. Through the window, they could see a black luxury sedan pulling up. Elizabeth recognized her father's driver. He came himself, she murmured. Alexander Chen never did anything without careful calculation. His presence here meant he understood the magnitude of what was happening. James took her hand. Remember, this is our home. We make the rules here. Our home. The words gave her strength. They walked onto the porch together, just as Alexander Chen emerged from his car. He was exactly as Elizabeth remembered. Impeccably dressed, radiating authority, his silver hair gleaming in the morning sun. Behind him, cameras clicked, and reporters pushed forward. Elizabeth, her father's voice carried across the yard. This has gone on long enough. She felt James's hand tighten on hers. Drawing a deep breath, she stepped forward. You're right, Dad. It has. The reporters surged closer, sensing the story about to unfold. Elizabeth raised her voice to address them all. My name is Elizabeth Chen. Yes, I'm the missing heiress you've been looking for. But I'm also something else. I'm a farmer, an agricultural innovator, and a woman who finally found her true purpose. Her father's expression darkened. You're embarrassing yourself and the company. This little adventure. This isn't an adventure, Elizabeth cut in. This is my life's work. While you were dismissing my agricultural projects as hobbies, I was developing sustainable farming techniques that could revolutionize how small farms operate. She gestured to the fields around them. Everything you see here, the new irrigation systems, the heritage crop program, the organic certification process, it's all part of a viable business model for sustainable family farming. "And it's working," reporters scribbled frantically. Elizabeth could see the headlines forming: "Heiress turns farmer," "Romance in the Heartland," "Modern innovation meets traditional farming." "The board won't stand for this," her father warned. "Richard Maxwell is expecting—" "The board," Elizabeth interrupted, "might be interested to know that our sustainable farming initiatives have shown a 40% increase in yield with a 30% reduction in water usage. And as for Richard Maxwell," she squared her shoulders, "I'm not a business asset to be traded. I'm your daughter." The silence that followed was broken by a new voice. "She's also the best thing that's happened to this community in years." Bill Matthews stepped forward from the crowd, followed by other local farmers. "My farm's profits are up 25% since implementing her suggestions. The Hendersons were able to keep their family farm because of the grant program she helped set up." More voices joined in, more stories of how Elizabeth's knowledge had helped the farming community. Her father's expression shifted from anger to calculation as he realized this wasn't just about a rebellious daughter. "You've put me in a difficult position," he said finally. "No, Dad, I've given you an opportunity." Elizabeth gestured to James. "This is James Cooper. He's not just the man I love, he's my business partner. Together we've proven that sustainable agriculture isn't just environmentally responsible, it's profitable." She pulled out her research folders. "Everything's here. The data, the projections, the success metrics. Chen Technologies wants to enter the sustainable technology market. We've already done the groundwork." Her father's eyes narrowed, the businessman in him taking over. "You planned this." "I planned to find my own way," Elizabeth corrected. "What I found was something bigger than myself." Cameras flashed as James stepped forward, his quiet farmer's presence commanding unexpected attention. "Sir, your daughter has a brilliant mind for business, but she also has a heart for this land and these people. That's a rare combination." Alexander Chen studied them both for a long moment. Behind him, reporters waited breathlessly for his response. Finally, he straightened his tie. "Perhaps," he said carefully, "we should discuss this inside, all of us." As they turned toward the house, Elizabeth caught a glimpse of something in her father's eyes. Not approval exactly, but recognition. For the first time, he was seeing her not as his heir, but as her mother's daughter, someone capable of building her own legacy. The media exploded with questions, but Elizabeth only smiled. "We'll be making a full statement this afternoon," she announced, "about the future of sustainable farming, the role of family farms in modern agriculture, and yes, about love that grows in unexpected places." The screen door closed behind them, leaving the circus outside. In the familiar comfort of the farmhouse kitchen, Elizabeth felt the weight of secrets finally lift from her shoulders. Whatever came next, she was done hiding. James had thought he was prepared for what Elizabeth's revelation would bring. He wasn't. Within hours, his quiet farmhouse had transformed into an impromptu corporate headquarters. Men in expensive suits crowded his kitchen, spreading documents. Across the table where he and Elizabeth had shared so many quiet meals, their polished shoes tracked city dirt across his mother's hand-braided rugs. Elizabeth moved among them with natural authority, her voice carrying the same confidence she used when discussing crop rotation or cattle feed. But now she spoke of market projections and corporate restructuring, terms that made James's head spin. He retreated to the porch, seeking refuge in the familiar view of his fields. "It's a lot to take in, isn't it?" Bill Matthews had stayed behind, a solid presence amid the chaos. "Never thought I'd see the day when Cooper Farm made national news." James watched another sleek car pull up, this one carrying what Elizabeth had called the legal team. The gravel driveway was now filled with vehicles worth more than his annual revenue. "You know what the hardest part is?" James said quietly. "Watching her in there, seeing how easily she fits into that world. Makes me wonder if I've been fooling myself, thinking we could bridge this gap. Seems to me she left that world to be here." Bill replied. "That ought to tell you something." But doubt had taken root. Through the window, James could see Elizabeth. in deep discussion with her father and a group of executives. She looked so natural, so at home among the power suits and corporate jargon. The woman who had struggled with fence posts and celebrated her first successful tractor drive seemed very far away. A commotion at the end of the driveway drew their attention. Another wave of reporters had arrived, along with what appeared to be a helicopter circling overhead. James's peaceful farm had become a media spectacle. His phone buzzed, another call from a news outlet wanting an exclusive. They all wanted the same story: the romance between the billionaire heiress and the simple farmer. Some headlines had already started appearing online. Beauty and the Farm, billion-dollar love story, corporate princess finds country prince. Mr. Cooper, a young woman in a designer suit, approached the porch. "We need to discuss image, management and media strategy. Miss Chen's father thinks—" "James." Elizabeth's voice cut through the chaos. She stood in the doorway, concern etched on her face. "Can we talk?" He followed her to the barn, their sanctuary since this whole circus began. The familiar smells of hay and leather offered some comfort, but even here, the sound of helicopters and distant voices intruded. "I'm sorry," Elizabeth said as soon as they were alone. "I knew it would be intense, but I didn't expect them to descend all at once like this." James leaned against a stall door, trying to find the right words. "You're different with them, not better or worse, just different. Like you're speaking a language I don't understand. That's not—" "Let me finish," he said gently. "I saw you in there taking charge, knowing exactly how to handle everything. And I realized something. You've been holding back here, haven't you? Playing down who you really are to fit into my world." Elizabeth stepped closer, her eyes fierce. "No, I've been becoming who I really am. Everything I am in there. The business, knowledge, the corporate strategy, that's just training. What I am here with you, that's choice." A sharp knock interrupted them. "Ms. Chen, your father needs you for the board call." Elizabeth hesitated, torn between worlds. James managed a small smile. "Go, they need you." "You need me too." "Do I?" The question slipped out before he could stop it. "Because right now it seems like your world is doing a pretty good job of swallowing mine whole." She reached for his hand, but he stepped back. "I need some air. You should take your call." As he walked away, James could feel her eyes on him. The helicopter circled lower, and he wondered if they were getting shots of this moment, the simple farmer retreating from the complexity of his girlfriend's real life. Another headline in the making. He headed for the far field where the summer corn stood tall enough to block out the chaos. Here, at least, things still made sense. The crops didn't care about corporate mergers or media strategies. They just needed sun, rain, and honest work. All things he understood. But as the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the corn rows, James couldn't shake the image of Elizabeth in her element, commanding a room full of powerful people. She had dimmed her light to fit into his world, and he wasn't sure if that had been fair to either of them. The next morning brought Richard Maxwell Jr. himself to Cooper Farm, his Italian shoes unsuited for the gravel driveway. James watched from the barn as Elizabeth's would-be fiancé emerged from a luxury SUV, his casual designer outfit probably, worth more than a month's farm expenses. "Elizabeth is making a terrible mistake," Maxwell announced to Alexander Chen, loud enough for his voice to carry. "But we can still fix this before the merger is effected." James pretended to focus on repair work as the two men headed toward the house. He wasn't supposed to hear their conversation that drifted through the open window, but he did. "The board is concerned," Maxwell continued. "If she wants to play farmer, fine. We can set up a boutique organic division, put her name on it. But this relationship, it's bad for both our brands." "Be careful how you speak about my daughter," Alexander's voice held a warning. "She's proven more capable than you seem to think. She's also proven unpredictable. My father is reconsidering the merger, unless—" There was a pause, and James could imagine the meaningful look passing between them. "Unless what?" Alexander asked. Unless we can convince her to see reason. The Cooper farm could be generously compensated. Set up a trust fund that would ensure its survival. Everyone wins. James's hands tightened on his tools. They were talking about buying him off, as if his relationship with Elizabeth was a business transaction to be negotiated. James! Elizabeth's voice startled him. She stood in the barn doorway, concern written across her face. Why are you out? Here, the sustainable agriculture presentation is about to start. Before he could answer, Maxwell appeared behind her. Elizabeth, I thought we could talk privately. James watched her spine stiffen. Richard, I didn't expect you here. Clearly. Maxwell's smile didn't reach his eyes. You've made quite a splash in the media, but it's time to think about the bigger picture. The merger. The merger was never my concern, Elizabeth cut in. That was your father's plan, not ours. Don't be naive. Our marriage would have united two of the most powerful families in sustainable technology. Think of the good we could do together. James started to slip away, but Elizabeth's hand shot out, grabbing his arm. I am thinking of the good I can do right here. Maxwell's polite facade cracked slightly. With him, Elizabeth, be reasonable. What can a struggling farmer offer that compares to our combined resources? Authenticity, she replied. Real experience. Actual innovation instead of corporate greenwashing. And love. Maxwell's laugh was cruel. How romantic. I wonder if your farmer feels the same way now that he's seen the circus your life really is. James felt Elizabeth's grip tighten on his arm. He knew he should say something, defend their relationship, but Maxwell's words had hit too close to his own doubts. Mr. Cooper, Maxwell turned to him, all business. Let's be direct. Name your price. The Chen-Maxwell merger is worth billions. Surely we can find a number that makes everyone happy. The silence that followed was deafening. James could feel Elizabeth holding her breath beside him, waiting for his response. Everything Maxwell had said about their different worlds echoed his own fears from yesterday. But standing here in his barn, with the morning sun streaming through, the rafters and the smell of honest work in the air, James found his voice. You know what your billions haven't bought you, Mr. Maxwell? The knowledge of how it feels to watch a seed you planted break through the soil. The satisfaction of seeing a crop you nursed through drought finally flourish. The joy of building something real with your own hands. He turned to Elizabeth, finally meeting her eyes. You can't put a price on that kind of happiness, and you sure as hell can't put a price on love. Maxwell's face darkened. How disappointingly predictable. Elizabeth, when you're ready to stop. Playing in the dirt, you know where to find me. The merger offer won't wait forever. After he left, Elizabeth moved closer to James. Did you mean that? About not being for sale? Meant every word. He managed a small smile. Even if I'm still trying to figure out how I fit into your world. Maybe, she said softly, it's time we stopped thinking about my world and your world. Maybe we should focus on building our world instead. The sound of more cars arriving broke the moment. The circus wasn't over yet, but as they walked back to face it together, James felt more certain of his place in it all. No amount of money could buy what he and Elizabeth were growing here, in the fields and in their hearts. The afternoon sun beat down on Cooper Farm. As Elizabeth stood before the assembled media, her father and the Maxwell contingent seated in chairs nearby, James stood quietly at her side, his presence giving her strength. The past day's events had clarified everything for them both. I want to address the speculation about the Chen-Maxwell merger and my role in it, Elizabeth began, her voice clear and confident. I am not, nor will I ever be, a corporate bargaining chip. My work here at Cooper Farm isn't a publicity stunt or a temporary rebellion. It's the foundation of something revolutionary. She gestured to the fields behind her, where the new irrigation systems gleamed in the sunlight. What we've achieved here in just a few months proves that sustainable agriculture isn't just an environmental choice. It's a viable business model that could save family farms across the country. James stepped forward, adding his voice to hers. Our success isn't just about new technology or modern methods. It's about blending innovation with generations of farming knowledge. You can't put a price tag on that kind of wisdom. Alexander Chen watched his daughter with newfound respect as she outlined their vision. A network of family farms implementing sustainable practices supported by modern technology but maintaining their independence. The reporters scribbled frantically, capturing every word. As for my personal life, Elizabeth continued, reaching for James's hand, that's not up for negotiation or corporate approval. My heart and my work belong here. Richard Maxwell Sr., who had arrived that morning, stood up in protest. This is business suicide, the merger. The merger was always about power, not progress, Elizabeth cut in. If Chen Technologies wants to truly lead in sustainable agriculture, they don't need Maxwell Industries. They need real farmers, real innovation, and real results, all of which we're proving right here. The crowd stirred as more local farmers arrived, parking their trucks alongside the luxury cars. They stood in silent support, a testament to the impact Elizabeth and James had already made in the community. James looked out at the gathered crowd, corporate executives in suits, farmers in work clothes, reporters with cameras, all focused on their small farm. Somehow, two different worlds had collided here, and instead of destruction, they had found possibility. Change is coming to American agriculture, he said, his quiet voice carrying authority. The only question is whether big corporations will help or hinder that change. Elizabeth and I are offering a partnership that could transform farming while preserving its heart and soul. Alexander Chen stood, straightening his tie. The cameras swung toward him, anticipating corporate opposition. Instead, he smiled, a real smile reminiscent of Elizabeth's. My daughter has her mother's vision, he announced, and she's proven her point. Chen Technologies will be proud to support this initiative under her leadership. The farmhouse kitchen had never seen anything quite like this meeting. Around the worn wooden table, where James and Elizabeth had shared countless meals, sat the CEO of Chen Technologies, 2 corporate lawyers, and 3 leading agricultural experts. Paper cups of Sarah's diner coffee sat alongside tablets displaying complex financial projections. The Cooper Farm model, Elizabeth explained, pulling up detailed charts on the big screen they'd installed. A hybrid approach combining traditional farming wisdom with cutting-edge sustainable practices. We're not just talking about organic certification, we're talking about complete agricultural renovation. James picked up the thread naturally, their presentation flowing between them like a well-rehearsed dance. Each participating farm maintains its independence while becoming part of a larger support network. Shared resources, collective purchasing. Power, but individual control over their land and methods. The agricultural experts leaned forward, intrigued. One of them, Dr. Martinez from the State Agricultural Board, nodded approvingly. You're essentially creating a cooperative, but with modern technology and corporate backing. Exactly, Elizabeth confirmed. Chen Technologies provides the infrastructure and innovation, while the farmers provide the expertise and execution. It's a true partnership. Alexander Chen studied the projected figures. These results from your test period are impressive. A 40% increase in yield while reducing water usage. If we could replicate this across a network of farms. We can, James said confidently, because unlike top-down corporate farming initiatives, this model grows from the ground up. Real farmers making real decisions about their land. The lawyers exchanged glances, scribbling notes. One of them raised a concern about liability and standardization, but Elizabeth was ready. We've already drafted guidelines that balance innovation. With autonomy, each farm in the network will have access to our sustainable farming protocols, but with the flexibility to adapt them to local conditions. James watched her with pride. She moved seamlessly between detailed financial projections and practical farming applications, never losing sight of either world. This was Elizabeth in her element, not the corporate heiress or the runaway bride, but a visionary bridging two worlds that desperately needed each other. The first phase would involve 10 local farms, Elizabeth continued. We've already had significant interest. Bill Matthews has offered his farm as the second test site. The meeting continued as they addressed questions and concerns. By late afternoon, even the lawyers were nodding along. Alexander Chen looked at his daughter with newfound respect. "You've thought of everything," he said during a break. "Your mother would be proud. She always said you had more than just business sense. You had vision." Elizabeth blinked back unexpected tears. "I wish she could see this." "She can," James said softly. "It's growing all around us." As the meeting wound down, contracts were drafted and preliminary agreements were signed. Cooper Farm would become the flagship operation of a new subsidiary, Chen Sustainable Agricultural Network. Elizabeth would serve as CEO, with James as Chief Agricultural Officer, titles that made him chuckle but reflected their equal partnership. In the venture, one thing, James said as the lawyers packed up their briefcases, the name stays Cooper Farm. Some things don't need corporate rebranding. Elizabeth squeezed his hand under the table. Wouldn't have it any other way. The transformation of Cooper Farm happened gradually over the next few weeks. New equipment arrived alongside traditional farming tools, creating a harmonious blend of old and new. Elizabeth had insisted that every innovation had to prove its worth in the field, not just on paper. "Your father thinks we're moving too slowly," James mentioned one morning as they walked the eastern field, tablet in hand to monitor the new soil sensors. "He wanted to modernize everything at once." Elizabeth smiled, pausing to run her hands through the ripening wheat. "Dad's used to corporate timelines, but you taught me that good things take time to grow." They developed a new rhythm to their days. Mornings still began before dawn with traditional farm work. James had been adamant about maintaining the hands-on connection to the land. Afternoons now included video conferences with other farmers in the network, sharing insights and solving problems together. "Bill's irrigation system is showing even better results than ours," Elizabeth noted, reviewing the data. "Something about his soil composition. We should look into that." James nodded, still amazed at how she could switch between boardroom analysis and practical farming knowledge. "Remember when you pretended not to know what NPK ratios were? Remember when you pretended my corporate experience was intimidating?" She countered, bumping his shoulder playfully. The local community had slowly come around, especially as results became visible. Sarah's Diner now proudly served Cooper Farm organic produce, and other farmers regularly stopped by to see the new systems in action. "You've started something special here," Bill Matthews said one afternoon during a demonstration of their new composting technique. "Never thought I'd see traditional farming and modern technology work together like this." The corporate world was taking notice too. Agricultural magazines requested interviews, and sustainability conferences sought them as speakers. But they maintained their focus on the practical work, letting results speak louder than publicity. James found himself growing comfortable with the business side of their operation, while Elizabeth discovered a deeper appreciation for traditional farming methods. They learned from each other, strengthening both their professional partnership and personal relationship. Late one evening, as they sat on the porch reviewing plans for the next phase of their project, Elizabeth noticed James, smiling at her. "What?" "Just thinking about how far we've come," he said, "from a stranger in a storm to revolutionizing farming practices. Think anyone would believe this story?" Elizabeth set aside her tablet. "The best stories are usually the ones that seem least likely, like a corporate heiress and a farmer finding love while saving family farms." As if to punctuate her words, a shooting star streaked across the darkening sky. Some things, they had learned, were beyond even the most careful planning. They just needed the courage to grow naturally. The autumn harvest brought golden light and a sense of completion to Cooper Farm. 6 months had passed since the media storm, and the results of their work were evident in more than just the thriving crops. The Chen Sustainable Agricultural Network had grown to include 15 farms, each showing remarkable improvements in both yield and sustainability. Elizabeth stood in her father's old office at Chen Technologies, looking out over the Manhattan skyline. She'd been offered this space, her rightful place as the board called it, but her heart was elsewhere. "You're sure about this?" Alexander Chen asked, reviewing her final proposal. "Running the network from the farm instead of headquarters?" "The whole point is to stay connected to the actual work," Elizabeth replied. "Besides, modern technology means I can manage things from anywhere. And James belongs on his farm," her father finished. "I understand that now." As she drove back to the farm that evening, Elizabeth reflected on how much had changed. Her mother's inheritance, once her escape fund, had been reinvested in the network. The corporate world that had once felt like a prison now served as a tool for real change, and a man who had once seemed worlds apart from her had become her home. Sarah's Diner had become the unofficial headquarters of their farming revolution. Local farmers gathered there each morning, sharing stories of successful harvests and transformed farms. The wall behind the counter now proudly displayed a map, marking each member of the network, with Cooper Farm at its heart. The change was most visible in the younger generation. Farm kids who had once planned to leave for the city were now returning with agricultural degrees and fresh ideas. They saw a future in the land their parents had feared would be lost to corporate takeovers. James and Elizabeth's story had become part of local legend, though the reality of their daily work was far from the fairy tale the media had painted. They worked hard, faced challenges, and celebrated small victories together, proving that true partnership could bridge any divide. The wedding was held in the Eastern Field, where their story had begun. Elizabeth wore a simple white dress, her feet bare in the soil that had changed her life. James stood proud in his father's restored wedding suit, surrounded by both farming families and corporate executives who had become unlikely friends. Their vows spoke of growth, of nurturing both land and love, of finding strength in unlikely places. Alexander Chen watched with misty eyes as his daughter married not the corporate match he'd planned, but the partner she'd chosen for herself. The Cooper Farm sign now bore both their names, a symbol of their merged worlds. The land that had once been on the brink of failure now stood as a beacon of innovation and hope for family farms everywhere. 1 year later, a familiar storm rolled across Cooper Farm, but this time, as thunder shook the windows, Elizabeth and James sat contentedly on their porch, watching nature's display. The farm had flourished beyond their dreams, its success replicated across dozens of other family farms in their network. In the renovated barn, their state-of-the-art monitoring system tracked crop health alongside traditional farming tools. It was a perfect blend of old and new, just like their love story, proving that the best endings sometimes start with a stranger seeking shelter from a storm. "Think we'll get another unexpected visitor tonight?" James teased, squeezing his wife's hand. Elizabeth smiled, leaning against him. "Lightning doesn't strike twice, but sometimes once is enough."